My wife sold the antique painting my mother gave to my daughter for $95,000 and spent it on her stepchild. When my mother found out, she didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for explanations or forgiveness. She just smiled the way she does when she's already 3 moves ahead and said, "That painting was..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Because the moment those words left her mouth, I watched the color drain from my wife's face, and I knew deep in my chest before my brain could catch up that everything we thought was settled was about to come apart. I should have known something was wrong before we even stepped into the house. You can smell a renovation the same way you can smell a lie. Fresh paint has a sharpness to it, a chemical edge that doesn't belong to quiet family spaces. Sawdust lingers too clinging to the air, whispering that money has been spent somewhere no one bothered to explain. Ellie hopped out of the car ahead of me, her backpack thumping against her hip, her sketchbook tucked under one arm like it was fragile. She was 11, all elbows and knees, and that careful excitement kids get when something important belongs to them. "Dad," she said already halfway up the walk, "do you think Grandma will let me hang it in the study today? Just for a little while. I want to see it in better light." "I'm sure she will," I said, even though my stomach had started doing that slow, uneasy roll it does when reality doesn't match the version you rehearsed in your head. The painting lived at my mother's house because it made sense. Climate control, no direct sunlight, walls thick enough that sound and heat didn't travel. It wasn't just art, it was old, irreplaceable, the kind of thing that carried history in the cracks of its varnish. My mother had given it to Ellie 6 months earlier, not as a loan, not as a someday, but as a gift. Ellie loved it in her quiet way. She didn't talk about its value. She talked about the brushstrokes, the way the colors softened near the edges, the feeling that the woman in the portrait was about to turn her head if you waited long enough. The front door opened easily. I still had a key. Not because I was especially trusted, but because I was useful. There's a difference. One gets you affection, the other gets you access and errands. Inside, the hallway runner was gone, replaced with protective plastic taped neatly at the edges. Blue painter's tape marked off doorways like polite warnings: don't cross, don't question, don't touch. Ellie tiptoed, lowering her voice without being asked. "Are they fixing something?" "I don't know," I said, which was true and not true at the same time. From the back of the house came the faint whine of power tools, distant but unmistakable. Money noise, improvement noise. The kind of sound you don't hear unless someone has decided they deserve more than they had yesterday. Ellie's eyes lit up. Maybe Grandma's finally redoing the study. I didn't answer. I followed her down the hall instead, past framed family photos and into the room where the painting had always hung. The hooks were still there. That was the first thing I noticed. The brass hooks, evenly spaced, catching the light from the window at the wrong angle now that there was nothing hanging from them. The wall behind them was lighter, untouched by years of shadow, a clean rectangle where history should have been. Ellie stopped so abruptly I nearly walked into her. She stared at the empty wall. Then she took a step closer, slow and careful, like the space might explain itself if she didn't startle it. She touched the air where the frame should have been. "Dad," she asked quietly, "did Grandma move it?" "No," I said, even though I hadn't checked. Even though I hadn't asked. Some truths announce themselves before anyone speaks them out loud. Ellie swallowed. "Did she change her mind?" That question landed harder than anything else could have. Not anger, not accusation. Just that careful fear kids get when they think love has rules they missed. "I'm going to find out," I said, and left the room before she could see my face. I found Laura in the kitchen, phone in hand, her shoulders tight in that way that meant she'd already rehearsed a version of this conversation she liked better than the real one. The smell of fresh paint was strongest there, mingling with coffee and something floral that didn't belong. "Where's the painting?" I asked. She didn't look up right away. That was answer enough. "Good morning to you too," she said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Laura," I said, "where is it?" She exhaled, slow and deliberate. "We needed to talk about it eventually." Eventually, that word does a lot of damage when it's used to delay honesty. "What did you do?" She set her phone down. I sold it. The room went quiet in that thick, suffocating way that makes your ears ring. "You sold it," I repeated. "Yes," she said, like she was explaining a scheduling change. "It was valuable, and it was just sitting there." "It was Ellie's," I said. "She's 11, Laura replied. She doesn't need something like that right now. My hands curled into fists before I realized they were shaking. You sold my daughter's painting. I used the money for Tyler, she said quickly, as if that explained everything. He needed it. Needed it. The way adults always do when they want to justify taking something that was never theirs. How much, I asked. 95,000, she said. A collector wired it. Quick sale. The number echoed in my head, heavy and unreal. Don't tell your mother, Laura added, her voice sharpening. She doesn't need the stress. I laughed once, sharp and hollow. You mean you don't want the consequences? She opened her mouth to argue, but I was already turning back down the hall. Ellie was still standing in the study, staring at the empty wall, like she was waiting for it to fix itself. That night she didn't cry. She just nodded when I told her we'd talk about it later, the way kids do when they're trying not to be a problem. And that was the moment I knew I was going to tell my mother everything. Because some things don't belong to the people who sell them. I waited until Ellie was asleep before I let myself sit down. She fell asleep faster than usual, like her body was relieved to stop pretending everything was fine. Her sketchbook lay open on the nightstand, a half-finished drawing of the woman from the painting, eyes softer than I remembered. Ellie had changed the mouth slightly, curved it upward, like she wanted the woman to look reassuring. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet of the house we shared with Laura and Tyler. It didn't feel like home in that moment. It felt like a place where things went missing and no one apologized. Laura was on the couch when I came downstairs, scrolling through her phone, thumb moving fast. She looked up when she saw me already guarded. She's asleep, I said. Good, Laura replied. She's resilient. That word again. Resilient. Adults use it when they want children to absorb damage quietly. You didn't ask her how she feels, I said. She's 11, Laura said, exasperated. She'll get over it. She didn't lose a toy, I said. You took something that mattered to her. Laura stood crossing her arms. I didn't take it from her. Your mother was holding it. She was holding it for Ellie, I corrected. You knew that. Laura sighed like I was exhausting her. We needed the money. We, I repeated, or you. Her eyes flicked away for half a second. Tyler needed help. What kind of help cost $95,000, I asked. She hesitated. He's behind. School, activities. He needs structure. He needed a car, I said flatly, and a new laptop, and that private coach you bragged about at dinner. Her jaw tightened. Don't do this! Do what I asked. Add it up. He's my son, she snapped. I will do whatever it takes for him. And Ellie, I asked quietly. Laura's shoulders dropped just a fraction. Ellie has you. The way she said it made it sound like a limitation instead of a gift. You didn't even ask my mother, I said. You didn't ask me. You didn't ask Ellie. Laura's voice sharpened. Because you would have said no. Because it wasn't yours, I said. She stared at me, frustration flashing across her face. It was a painting. It's not like she can't still draw. I felt something settle in my chest, then heavy and cold. The kind of clarity that doesn't come with anger, just certainty. Who bought it, I asked. Laura shook her head. It doesn't matter. It matters, I said. Who has it? A collector, she replied. Private. He paid quickly, wired the money. Did you keep any records, I asked. She frowned. Why? Because if you sold something that didn't belong to you, it belonged to your mother, Laura cut in. And she didn't say no. She didn't say yes, I said. And you know that. Laura stepped closer, lowering her voice. You are not telling your mother. She's finally settled. She doesn't need this. You mean you don't want her involved, I said. I don't want drama, Laura said. We're a family. I laughed softly. Families don't take from children and call it budgeting. Her eyes flashed. You're overreacting. I turned away before I said something I couldn't take back. The next morning, Ellie ate breakfast quietly. She asked if she could still go to art club after school. I said yes. She nodded like she'd expected that answer, like she was already learning what questions were safe. Laura left early, taking Tyler to school in the new car she hadn't mentioned when we were arguing. Ellie watched from the window, her face unreadable. Dad, she said after the door closed, is Grandma mad at me? No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. Because the painting, she said carefully. Maybe she wanted to keep it. No, I said again. She gave it to you. Ellie nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. Not because she didn't trust me, but because adults had just taught her that ownership was conditional. After I dropped Ellie off, I drove straight to my mother's place. Evelyn lived in a bright apartment in a quiet complex that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and expensive soap. It wasn't depressing, it was controlled. There was comfort in that. She opened the door before I knocked. "You're late," she said calmly. I blinked. "How did you—" "Your voice would have called already if this were small," she said. "Come in." She poured tea like this was a regular visit, like she hadn't already noticed the tightness in my jaw, the way my hands wouldn't stop moving. "They sold it," I said finally. Evelyn didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She just waited. "Laura sold the painting," I continued, "for $95,000. She used it for Tyler." My mother's lips pressed together, but her eyes stayed clear. "Did Ellie see?" she asked. "She saw the empty wall," I said. Evelyn closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, something had shifted, not into anger, but into focus. "Did she say anything?" Evelyn asked. "She asked if you changed your mind," I said. That did it. My mother inhaled sharply through her nose, then exhaled slow and steady. "Do you have messages?" she asked. "Receipts, dates." "I can get them," I said. "Laura's not careful." Evelyn nodded. "Good." I stared at her. "Aren't you upset?" She looked at me over the rim of her teacup. "Of course I am, but being upset is for later." She stood and walked to a small cabinet by the window. From it, she pulled a thin folder. "The painting," she said, tapping it. "Appraisal, provenance, insurance, documentation." I swallowed. "Why do you have all that?" "Because people get strange around valuable things," she replied. "And because I intended to protect Ellie." My heart started beating faster. Protect her how? Evelyn met my eyes, not with shouting. She picked up her phone and dialed a number I didn't recognize. "James," she said when someone answered. "Yes, it happened. I'll need you this weekend." She hung up and looked at me. "I'm going to handle it," she said. "How?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "You'll see when it matters." That afternoon, Laura texted me. "We're having people over Saturday. A little celebration. Don't make this awkward." I stared at the screen. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. "We're going," my mother wrote. I felt the air shift around me like pressure before a storm. The days between that message and Saturday stretched thin and tight like wire pulled too far. Nothing exploded. Nothing resolved. That was the worst part. Life kept moving in its usual small ways, and every ordinary moment felt wrong because something important had been taken and no one was admitting it. Ellie went to school. Laura went to work. Tyler bragged about the new car to anyone who would listen, and I walked through the house feeling like I was living inside a secret I hadn't agreed to keep. Ellie didn't bring up the painting again. That worried me more than if she had. She stopped asking questions the way kids do when they decide answers might hurt. Instead, she filled her afternoons with drawing pages and pages of faces that looked almost the same except for the eyes. Some were hopeful, some looked like they were waiting, a few looked tired in a way no 11-year-old should. On Wednesday night, I found her sitting on the floor of her room, erasing the same line over and over. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "you're going to tear the paper." She shrugged. "It's okay." I sat beside her. "You know none of this is your fault." She nodded, but she didn't look at me. "I know," she said, then hesitated. "But maybe Aunt Laura thought Tyler needed it more." That sentence landed like a crack in glass. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet and logical and wrong. "Needing something doesn't mean you get to take it," I said. Ellie pressed her eraser down harder. "Adults do it all the time." I didn't have an answer for that. I just put my arm around her shoulders and stayed there until she leaned into me, small and warm and trying not to need reassurance. Laura acted like nothing had changed. She planned the party with the same energy she put into everything she thought validated her choices. Grocery lists taped to the fridge, messages about drinks and seating, a casual mention of inviting my mother phrased like a courtesy instead of a trap. "She'll like seeing everyone," Laura said one evening, breezing past me. "It'll be good for her." I thought of Evelyn's calm voice, her precise questions, the thin folder she'd pulled from the cabinet, like a magician revealing a final card. "I'm sure it will," I said. Friday night, my mother called. "I don't want Ellie to feel nervous," Evelyn said, "so don't prepare her. Let her be a child." "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said firmly. "This is not her burden." She paused, then added, "It's mine." Saturday arrived hot and bright, the kind of day that feels smug about itself. Perfect weather for celebration. Perfect weather for pretending everything is fine. Laura decorated the backyard like it was a magazine spread, balloons tied to chairs, a banner congratulating Tyler on his fresh start. The irony of that phrase nearly made me laugh out loud. Cars lined the street by noon. Relatives I hadn't seen in years showed up with gift bags and forced smiles. Neighbors wandered in drinks already in hand. Tyler soaked it up, laughing loudly, showing off basking in attention. Ellie stayed close to me, towel folded neatly over her arm, even though she hadn't gone near the pool. Her eyes drifted to the far end of the yard where Laura stood holding court, radiant and confident, like this moment had been waiting for her. Then the gate clicked. I turned instinctively. Evelyn walked in without hesitation, dressed simply but sharply, posture, straight expression, unreadable. Beside her was a man in a navy blazer, carrying a slim leather folder. And behind them, just a step back, was another man I didn't recognize, older, well-dressed, eyes sharp and curious. The conversations around us faltered. Laughter stumbled. Someone near the grill lowered their voice mid-sentence. Laura's smile froze. "Mom," she said, recovering quickly. "You came." Evelyn looked around the yard, taking in the decorations, the pool, the crowd. "I did," she said pleasantly. "I heard there was something to celebrate." Her gaze settled briefly on Tyler, then moved on. Laura laughed too loudly. "Of course. Come, let me get you a drink." "That won't be necessary," Evelyn said. The man beside her stepped forward. "James Caldwell," he said calmly, offering a hand no one seemed eager to take. Laura frowned. "Is this business?" Evelyn smiled, small and composed. "Family business," she said, "which tends to be the most complicated kind." People were watching now, pretending not to, but watching all the same. "I think we should talk privately," Laura said, her voice tight. Evelyn shook her head. "You've had plenty of private time." A hush fell over the yard, subtle but unmistakable. Tyler glanced between us, confused. Ellie pressed closer to my side. "I heard you sold the painting," Evelyn said. Laura's face flushed. "We didn't want to upset you." "No," Evelyn replied evenly. "You didn't want consequences." The word hung there heavy and undeniable. "It was just a painting," Laura said defensively. "And the money went to a good cause." Evelyn tilted her head. "Did it?" Laura opened her mouth and closed it. Evelyn turned slightly, addressing the gathered crowd with the ease of someone who had nothing to hide. "I won't keep you long," she said. "I know you're here to enjoy yourselves." The man behind her, James, opened the folder. Evelyn looked back at Laura, her expression calm, almost gentle. "That painting was," she said, pausing just long enough to let the silence sharpen, "held in trust." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "For Ellie," Evelyn continued, "I am the trustee. She is the beneficiary." Laura blinked. "That's not—" "It is," Evelyn said, "and it was never yours to sell." James stepped forward. "We have documentation," he said quietly. "Appraisal, provenance, insurance, and a formal notice regarding the unauthorized sale of a protected asset." The third man cleared his throat. "Victor Lane," he said. "I'm the buyer." Laura's face went pale. "I'd like my money returned," Victor added calmly, immediately. The yard felt suddenly too small. Ellie looked up at my mother, eyes wide. Evelyn met her gaze and nodded once. "It's being handled," she said. Laura staggered back a step, the celebration collapsing around her like paper in the rain. And I realized then that this wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming something that should never have been taken. For a moment, no one moved. The pool pump hummed. Ice clinked in someone's glass. A child laughed on the far side of the yard, unaware that the air had shifted so sharply the adults could feel it in their bones. Laura recovered first. She always did. It was one of her skills, regaining control when she sensed it slipping. She straightened her shoulders, pasted on a smile that trembled at the edges, and laughed, as if this were all some elaborate misunderstanding. "Mom," she said lightly, "you're being dramatic. This isn't the place for—" "This is exactly the place," Evelyn replied. Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it now, a firmness that didn't ask permission. "You chose a public celebration. You sold a child's future to pay for it. That makes this public." James Caldwell adjusted his grip on the folder. "Mrs. Bennett," he said to Laura, "you were not authorized to transfer ownership of that painting. The trust documentation is clear." "A trust?" Laura snapped. "I've never seen any trust." "That would be because you weren't meant to," Evelyn said. "Trusts exist to protect beneficiaries from people who feel entitled." A few heads turned. Someone near the grill cleared their throat. Tyler stood frozen by the pool confusion, flickering into something closer to fear. Victor Lane took a step forward, his tone measured but firm. I was assured the sale was clean. I paid in good faith. I expect restitution. Laura's eyes darted from Victor to James to me. You knew about this, she demanded. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at Ellie, who was staring at the folder like it might bite. I knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, I said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. She nodded barely. Laura's voice rose. This is insane. You're humiliating me. Evelyn met her gaze. No, your choices did that. Laura turned to me, desperation sharpening her words. Say something. Tell her this isn't necessary. I stood slowly. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out steady. You sold something that didn't belong to you. I did it for our family, she said. For Tyler, I replied. And what's wrong with that, she snapped. He needed help. So did Ellie, I said. And you took from her without asking. Tyler's face flushed. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. Evelyn turned to him, then her expression softening just a fraction. I know, she said. This isn't about you. James cleared his throat again. There's more, he said, and the way he said it made Laura stiffen. The proceeds of the sale were traced, he continued. Only a portion went toward expenses related to Tyler. The remainder was used for discretionary purchases. A murmur spread through the crowd. Laura's mouth opened. Closed. That's not... The records are quite clear, James said gently, and the buyer has initiated a demand for immediate repayment. Victor nodded. I'll be filing a civil claim if the funds aren't returned promptly. Laura's knees seemed to buckle. She reached for the back of a chair, steadying herself. I don't have that kind of money, she whispered. Evelyn tilted her head. You had it, she said. You spent it. Laura's eyes filled not with tears but with panic. You can't do this. Evelyn's voice stayed even. I can and I am. The party dissolved around us. Conversation stopped entirely now. People who had come for celebration shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were standing in the middle of something irreversible. Let's talk inside, Laura said, her voice thin. Please. No, Evelyn said. We're finished here. She turned to James. Serve the notices. James handed Laura an envelope. What's that? Laura asked, though she already knew. Formal notice regarding the trust violation, James said, and a demand for restitution. Laura looked at the envelope like it might explode. And this, James added, handing her a second document, is a notice of separation of finances effective immediately. Laura's breath hitched. You're freezing me out. I'm protecting Ellie, Evelyn said. Something you failed to do. I felt Ellie press closer to me, her small hand gripping my sleeve. I wrapped an arm around her, anchoring us both. Laura looked at me one last time, her voice cracking. You're really going to let this happen? I thought of Ellie's careful questions, of her erasing the same line over and over, of the empty wall where something precious had once hung. Yes, I said, I am. Evelyn stepped toward Ellie, lowering herself slightly so they were eye to eye. Sweetheart, she said, her voice warm now. You didn't lose anything. It was taken. Ellie's lip trembled. I thought maybe I didn't deserve it yet. Evelyn's eyes flashed sharp and fierce. You deserve what was given to you, always. Ellie nodded, blinking hard. Victor checked his watch. I'll expect contact from counsel by Monday, he said, already turning away. Guests began to leave, murmuring excuses, gathering bags and children. The celebration decorations sagged in the heat, suddenly absurd. Laura stood alone in the middle of it all, clutching papers, the weight of consequences settling in. As Evelyn walked toward the gate, she paused beside me. This isn't the end, she said quietly. It's the correction. I watched her leave Ellie tucked close against me and knew that nothing about our lives would be simple after this. But for the first time in weeks, it felt honest. The house felt different after everyone left, like the walls had overheard too much and didn't know what to do with the information. Balloons bobbed uselessly against the fence. Paper plates sagged on the picnic table. The pool water shimmered blue and innocent, as if it had nothing to do with what it had cost. Laura sat at the kitchen table long after the last car pulled away, the envelope spread in front of her, like evidence. She didn't cry. She stared. That frightened me more than tears would have. Ellie went upstairs without being told. She didn't ask questions. She didn't linger. She just disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a child trying not to take up space. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink, staring out at the backyard. Laura finally spoke. You let her do this, she said. I turned. You did this. She laughed once brittle. I was trying to help my son. You were trying to control the outcome, I said. There's a difference. Laura pressed her palms flat against the table. You don't understand what it's like to be afraid your child is falling behind. I do, I said quietly. I watched my daughter lose something she loved and tell herself it was her fault. Laura flinched. That's not fair. Neither was selling her painting, I said. She picked up one of the documents and scanned it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves if she looked hard enough. I didn't know about the trust. That was the point, I said. It was there to protect Ellie from exactly this. Laura's voice dropped. What happens now? I took a breath. Victor wants his money back. James will be in touch. My mother will make sure the painting is returned. And me, she asked. I looked at her, then really looked. At the woman I'd married who had convinced herself that urgency justified entitlement. You'll have to deal with the consequences of your choices. Her shoulders sagged. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. I am, I said. Not tonight, but soon. Laura nodded slowly as if she'd been expecting it. Because of the painting. Because of what it revealed, I said. That night, Ellie crawled into bed beside me like she used to when she was smaller. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. Is Grandma mad? She asked into my shoulder. No, I said. She's protecting you. Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Does that mean I get it back? Yes, I said. It's coming home. She exhaled a long breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding for weeks. Okay, she said softly and fell asleep. The next few days moved quickly and slowly at the same time. Lawyers called, emails arrived. Laura's accounts were frozen pending investigation. Victor Lane's attorney sent formal demands, each one more precise than the last. Laura tried bargaining, first with me, then with my mother, then with James. None of it worked. I'll pay it back, she said one afternoon, voice thin, over time. Victor's reply was short and brutal. No. The truth surfaced piece by piece like debris rising after a flood. Laura hadn't just spent the money on Tyler. She'd used it to cover debts I didn't know about. A failed business venture. Credit cards maxed out quietly. Purchases she justified as necessary until they stacked too high to ignore. Tyler found out last. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, pale and angry, clutching his phone. You used that money for this? He asked his mother, holding up photos of things she'd bought. You said it was for me. Laura didn't answer. I didn't want this, he said, voice shaking. I didn't want her stuff. Ellie heard the raised voices and froze halfway down the stairs. Tyler noticed her and looked stricken. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I didn't know. Ellie nodded, unsure what to do with the apology. I stepped between them gently. This isn't on either of you, I said. It never was. 2 weeks later, the painting came back. It arrived in a reinforced crate delivered by a man who handled it like it was alive. My mother was there when it was opened, standing close but not touching until Ellie was ready. The frame caught the light exactly the way I remembered. The colors were deeper than any photo could capture. Ellie reached out, fingertips hovering, then resting lightly against the edge. It's warm, she whispered. My mother smiled and squeezed her hand. That's because it's home. Laura wasn't there. By then, she had moved into a small apartment across town, taking only what she needed. The house felt quieter without her, not empty, just settled. Ellie started speaking up in small ways, correcting people when they interrupted her, saying no when she meant it. Once, when a teacher suggested she share her supplies with a classmate who hadn't brought any, Ellie said politely but firmly, I can help, but I don't want to give them away. I watched my mother one evening as Ellie sketched at the dining table. The painting hung safely nearby. Evelyn sipped her tea, eyes soft. You did the right thing, I said. She nodded. So did you. I thought of the moment Laura's face had gone pale, of the silence that followed the words that painting was, of how close we'd come to teaching Ellie the wrong lesson. What if I'd stayed quiet, I asked. My mother looked at me sharply. Then she would have learned that keeping peace matters more than protecting herself. I swallowed. And now? Now Evelyn said she learns that truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Ellie asked me a question she'd been holding on to. Dad, she said, not looking up from her drawing, if someone takes something that's yours and says they needed it more, that doesn't make it okay, right? No, I said, it doesn't. She nodded, satisfied, and kept drawing. I stood there listening to the scratch of her pencil and understood that the real restoration wasn't the painting. It was her voice. The legal part of everything arrived like winter quiet at first, then all at once. Letters in heavy envelopes, emails written in careful language that stripped emotion down to facts, phone calls scheduled in narrow windows, voices clipped and professional, as if what had happened could be reduced to bullet points and dates. Laura tried to keep things civil. That was the word she used, civil, as if politeness could smooth over betrayal. We met once in a cafe halfway between our two lives. She looked smaller there, curled around a cup of coffee she didn't drink. Her eyes flicked to the door every few seconds like she was waiting for someone to rescue her from consequences. "I'm not a monster," she said finally. "I didn't say you were," I replied. "But everyone's treating me like one," she snapped, then caught herself. "I made a mistake." I stared at her across the table. "You made a series of choices." She winced. "I was scared." "So was Ellie," I said. "She just didn't take anything from anyone to fix it." Laura looked down. "Tyler won't talk to me." "That's because he learned the truth," I said, "and it hurts." She pressed her lips together. "Your mother didn't have to go that far." I leaned back in my chair. She went exactly far enough. The repayment negotiations dragged on. Victor Lane wanted his money in full. Not apologies, not promises, cash. Laura's accounts were frozen, her credit shredded, her options narrowing by the day. Evelyn didn't gloat. She never even raised her voice. She let the system do what it was designed to do when someone sold what they didn't own. The painting, now safely insured and documented again, was moved temporarily to a gallery vault while the final paperwork was processed. Ellie visited it once, standing beside the curator, like she was meeting an old friend in a strange place. "It feels different here," she said quietly. "It won't be forever," Evelyn told her. "Some things take time to settle." At home we started packing, not dramatically, no shouting or slammed doors, just boxes and lists and decisions made without ceremony. Laura took what was hers. I took what was mine. Ellie packed her books and art supplies with careful precision, like she was afraid something might disappear if she didn't keep track of it. Tyler came by once, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said again to Ellie this time. "I really am." Ellie nodded. "I know." He swallowed. "I told Mom I don't want anything that came from that money." Ellie looked at him surprised. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, it was honesty, and for a moment that was enough. The court dates came and went. Laura agreed to a repayment plan that would follow her for years. The words breach of trust appeared in more than one document. They carried weight. They were permanent in a way apologies never are. Evelyn updated her estate planning quietly, efficiently. New safeguards, new trustees, new lines drawn where there had once been assumptions. "This isn't about punishment," she told me one afternoon as we walked through her living room. "It's about clarity." Ellie started sleeping better. She stopped checking doors twice before bed. She laughed more easily. Once at dinner, she interrupted me mid-sentence to correct a detail. I smiled. Laura would have called that rude. Evelyn called it confidence. One evening, Ellie asked to see the painting again. We drove to the gallery after hours, escorted by a security guard who treated the crate like it held something sacred. When the lid came off, Ellie didn't rush forward. She stood still, breathing like she was giving the moment room. "I missed you," she whispered, not embarrassed. Evelyn watched her eyes shining. "Soon," she said. "Very soon." Laura texted me that night. "I hope you're happy." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "I'm peaceful." She didn't reply. Weeks later, the painting came home for good. We hung it in the living room of the new house, smaller than the old one, quieter, filled with light in the afternoons. Evelyn supervised the placement, measuring twice, adjusting until it felt right. Ellie stood back, arms folded, evaluating like a professional. "There," she said finally. "That's where it belongs." That night, as Ellie worked at the table sketching, without erasing holes in the paper, Evelyn sat nearby knitting. The house hummed softly around us. "Grandma," Ellie asked suddenly, "why didn't you yell at Mom?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Because yelling is for people who want to feel powerful. I wanted to be effective." Ellie considered that. "I think I want to be effective too." I watched the two of them, generations connected by something stronger than obligation. Later, when the house was quiet, Evelyn turned to me. "You did well," she said. "So did you," I replied. She shook her head. I just refused to look away. I thought of how close I'd come to staying silent, of how easy it would have been to choose comfort over conflict. Outside, the evening settled in. Inside, Ellie's pencil moved steadily across the page, no longer hesitant. The damage hadn't disappeared. It had been addressed, named, corrected. And that made all the difference. The first night we slept in the new house, I lay awake longer than I meant to, listening to sounds that felt unfamiliar in the best possible way. No footsteps pacing above us, no whispered phone calls behind closed doors, no tension humming through the walls like static. Just quiet. Earned quiet. Ellie slept with her door open now. She said it made the house feel bigger. In the morning, sunlight spilled across the living room wall, catching the edge of the painting and warming it slowly like it was waking up with us. Ellie stood in front of it in her pajamas, cereal bowl forgotten on the table, studying the brushstrokes the way she always had, thoughtful, absorbed, unafraid to take her time. "It looks different here," she said. "It's the light," I replied. She nodded, "and the feeling." Evelyn arrived just before noon, carrying a small box of peppermint tea and a folder tucked under her arm, out of habit more than necessity. She didn't hover. She never did. She simply existed in the space like she belonged there, which she did. Ellie gave her a hug without hesitation. Later, while Ellie worked on a new drawing, Evelyn and I sat at the kitchen table. "Your mother would have loved this house," Evelyn said softly. I smiled. "She would have." Evelyn folded her hands. "I updated the trust," she said. "Everything is clear now. Protected." "Thank you," I said. She looked at me, eyes sharp but kind. "You shouldn't thank me for doing what any adult should." I thought of Laura then, of how she'd believed urgency excused entitlement, of how close I'd come to letting it slide just to keep the peace. "Ellie's been different," I said, "stronger." Evelyn nodded, because she learned something important. That lesson showed up in small ways. Ellie corrected a classmate who tried to take her markers without asking. She told her teacher when an assignment felt unfair, instead of assuming she was wrong. One afternoon, she asked me a question that mattered more than she realized. "Dad," she said, "if someone says they need something more than you, that still doesn't mean they get to take it right." "No," I said, "it doesn't." She smiled satisfied and went back to her drawing. Laura called once more weeks later. Her voice was quieter now, worn down by reality. "I'm moving again," she said. "Smaller place, cheaper." "I hope it works out," I replied. There was a pause. I didn't think it would end like this. "Neither did I said, "but this is where we are." She exhaled. "Tell Ellie I'm sorry." "I will," I said, though I wasn't sure when or how. When I told Ellie, she listened carefully. "Okay," she said, "I hope she learns." So did I. On a calm evening, not long after Ellie asked if we could sit together in the living room. No TV, no music, just us. She brought her sketchbook and sat cross-legged on the floor. I watched her draw the lines, confident, now her eraser untouched. Evelyn sat in the armchair, knitting quietly. "I like it when things are clear," Ellie said suddenly. Evelyn smiled. "Clarity is a gift." Ellie looked up at the painting, then back at us. "I think the lady in it is happier now." I felt something loosen in my chest. "She is," I said, "because she's where she belongs." That night, after Ellie went to bed, I stood alone in the living room and looked at the painting one more time. I thought about the moment Laura's face had gone pale, about the sentence Evelyn never finished out loud, about how close we'd come to teaching Ellie that silence was safer than truth. We didn't. Instead, she learned that what's given to you with love doesn't become negotiable just because someone else wants it more, that adults can choose honesty over comfort, that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're protection, and that sometimes the calmest voice in the room carries the most power. If this story made you stop and think, if it reminded you of a moment when you had to choose between keeping the peace and doing what was right, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what choice you would have made. We share stories like this every day, stories about boundaries and finding your way back to yourself. So if you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep going together.